Hey guys, welcome to episode 4 of the Nemcast, which is Nemesis Tactical Airsoft Podcast. I'm Courtney, owner and founder of Nemesis Tactical, and this is Ben,
owner and founder of Raresoft.
And today we're going to be covering, as promised, which we didn't do in the last episode, a bit of background on Raresoft, where the company sort of formed from, your experiences in the game as such, and, generally future plans going forward.
Yeah.
So, and also part 2 is going to be, which will be down in the description below, which will be linked if you're not interested in this bit per se and you want to go to the next one, is going to be about these things, which are really, really old school. What did you call them again?
BV guns, bullet valve guns.
Yes. So we're going to be covering that in part 2. So let's get part 1 underway. Hey guys, welcome back. This is part 1, the introduction to Raresoft, how the company was formed, that sort of thing. So, take it away. When did the company start, mate?
So, around September of 2020 was when the actual Facebook page was launched, and that was sort of on the back of a few other things that happened in the background, not to do with Raresoft, which was kind of a concept brewing around that time, maybe a bit earlier. But essentially the reason that I started Raresoft was because I was always interested in the older guns, the more obscure things. It wasn't always straight to that. Like my first gun was an Ares Honey Badger, so all you Ares ANG enjoyers,
I'm sorry for your loss.
You can enjoy that experience. It's not always been an easy life because
it's not an enjoyable experience, full stop. Ares are terrible. But that's a different story altogether. I could go on about that for hours.
Yeah, so it wasn't always that way, but I found myself kind of going down like a rabbit hole, which is something I've always done in like hobbies and stuff that I've got into, but I found myself going down a rabbit hole. And the first time I sort of really got my hands on that kind of kit was I went all the way to Glasgow. Now, at the time I was based in Manchester, which is a good old drive to go there. And essentially there was a chap there that was liquidating his, I think, brother-in-law's kit. And he had like a bit of a kit list, had all sorts of stuff. Some stuff he knew, some stuff not. And I had a couple of friends that were interested in some bits, and I thought, right, we'll go up, we'll see what's what, and we'll see what we can get from there. And there was guns that I kind of knew at the time, I knew a little bit about, and there was things there that's like, I'm not quite sure what that is. And picked loads of things that must have spent a good amount of money up there on guns that I knew, guns that I didn't know. There's literally a box of bits with super rare items in. Came back and had a look. This is like a Sun Project Muzzle, which is like essentially there was a kit that was made for like Ruger Mini 14s, which transformed. They're looking like a really weird, I think they're on Starship Troopers or something like that, like an old school kit. And there's a Sun Project Muzzle, which was made from a real kit. Old Technologies, one of those in there. There's a VFC Barrett. Yeah, VFC made a Barrett, 100 of them. It's one of those. A Model Gun Company VP70. There was a Systema in there. There was all sorts of bits and bobs. So straight away, one fell swoop, got a nice collection of some really old bits of kit, really odd ones, and I thought, this is cool, where can I get some more from? Where can I research these? Where can I get some more bits from? And started looking in Japan, managed to find a couple of Japanese second-hand sales sites, had to go around using a VPN, translator, contacting areas, eventually managing to actually get hold of some stuff that's like, sometimes you know what it is, like TM Uzis. People knew what TM Uzis were, but because they're that old, shops don't sell them, the gears break and people can't fix them, but you can still get them. So it gave you at first the opportunity to get things that you knew exist, but couldn't really get hold of.
What made you reach out to Japan initially? Obviously Airsoft sort of originates from there, but what made you think, right, I'm going to start collecting weird shit? What made you go down that rabbit hole?
Well, there's a few things. I mean, I always wanted some of the old historical kits, and when I first learned of like the Shui guns, which is why it was my sort of own personal gun that I had for years before I started Raresoft, or around that time, was a Shui MP44, which uses an Escort gas blowback system, basically a precursor to a Daytona. And I was like, right, where can I get one of these? I want one. How can I get it? And Shui being the Japanese company, no wholesalers at the time anyway, very limited sort of retail opportunities, and I thought, well, the only place to look for is Japan. So I started looking there, and I was just coming across things that I knew of here, TM Spaz 12s, folding stocks, that kind of thing. And then, yeah, as you said, you learn the history of Airsoft. It's been a thing in Japan since the 80s in some formats, and it really is a massive rabbit hole to go down. So I started looking at things in Japan, importing that kind of thing, and I thought, there's a market for this here. TM Uzis, people are bringing those in. There's people after them. At the time, the Northeast Uzi wasn't even announced, I don't think. So this was the only airsoft Uzi of that kind anyway, the full-size one that you could get. Obviously, proprietary V5 gearbox is less than reliable. And
I really love that word, proprietary.
If anything breaks, which they did, I think I got quite a few over the years, and I had two come in, and it's one of those things. The seller describes it as working. You get there, and one of them had 2 gears shredded, another one had 1 gear shredded. Game over. No Uzis for me. And that was the first time it's like, right, okay, this isn't all sunshine and rainbows. There's a good chance, like anything, if you buy something before you see it, you can get stung. But started doing that, and basically finding guns that I didn't know existed, that I knew existed, couldn't get hold of, and thought, well, I'm not going to be the only person looking for this.
I mean, is it the Calico? That's a really fine example of, I didn't even know they made one.
Yes.
Until I met you proper, and you were like, oh, have you seen this Calico? And I was like, they make a Calico, show me.
Yes.
I mean, they're awful. The look of them, they look god-awful.
Sound
but
like
they're so awful, I kind of want one. But yeah, it's you get some really unusual things.
Yeah.
I suppose the clue's in the name of the company.
Yeah, so guns like that, and in Japan, they're not as hard to get hold of as here, because again, these are from times where airsoft wasn't a big thing here. It was kind of taken off in Japan, but here it just wasn't a thing. Ares was called Star. There was a few other companies. Top had AGs, but they used the bellows system.
What year would this have been, roughly? When sort of Ares was Star and that sort of thing? Are we talking early 2000s?
Early 2000s, around that kind of time. But there's other companies that have had some way of being in airsoft for a couple of years. There's a company I think called Unizawa that rebranded to KHC, who made a really cool quad shot shotgun in airsoft called the Maverick. Had a few of those in. But yeah, it's essentially a rabbit hole that you go down, and it's like, right, I want to bring some of this stuff in to see that I never had. Other people are going to be interested in this. Let's start offering the opportunity to actually get some of these things. And it was quite a lengthy process to do at the time, the way in which I was doing it, because a lot of Japanese shops are quite funny when it comes to like foreign people trying to buy stuff, especially direct players, so to speak, of airsoft. They don't like selling the kit and having to export it to another company. They like to keep airsoft in Japan, essentially. And at the time, in order for me to try and get any of this stuff, I had to send emails and ask for bids and contact sellers, which is long-winded. But that sort of picked up. A lot of it turned not just from sales, but to just trying to show people things that exist. As you said, there was the Calico. So there's things that I didn't know exist. The Calico, best one's the MGC, like a non-blowback gun, massive hopper in the top, just so many pulls of the trigger, and you just unlimited, really low FPS, no hop goodness. But it's nice and simple. I've had a few, they've never leaked. But yeah, that's kind of how Raresoft started, is essentially going down a rabbit hole, getting my own bits of kit, and then that's kind of grown into what it is now, where parts of it is sales, parts of it is sort of talking to people and discussing the technology and history, which is where some of these will come in later.
Yeah, in part 2. No, it's very, very, how to describe it? It's quite reminiscent to sort of Ian McCullen, Forgotten Weapons type thing, where he'll review really old, weird things and the history behind it. So that's sort of something we're looking at doing potentially. As Ben gets new, weird, unusual guns in, perhaps we can find some of the old designs and explain how they work, what they are, roughly when they were made, and go down that rabbit hole. So that's something we'll be looking at doing. Now, the next question is, I suppose, where do you see Raresoft going? Are you going to expand it? Are you going to make it a limited company? What's the plan? What's going forward?
So initially, the reason that I started Raresoft was to give sort of other people the chance to get some of these guns, and it was cool for me. I got to get my hands on guns that I never would have bought or been able to buy by myself, and use it, test it, see what it's like, and then ship it to a customer. Everyone's a winner, and basically, try and make the hobby pay for itself. That was as far as I ever saw it going. But as it stands now, I'm always being asked for things that I'd have to spend God knows how many hours looking for. There's, people that want things that are very quick. There's basically, there is a demand for some kind of item just in a shop, stuff off the shelf. Can I buy this? Click checkout, ship it, and that kind of thing. Whereas it's never been that way. So in the future, because this is all ran and funded by myself. There's no anything else. It's just one guy operating from his house, essentially trying to sort of make his hobby pay for himself or put it towards it. So in the future, the way basically I see it going is try and get some more stock, definitely build a website. It was something that I was starting doing last year, have the domain name, have this and that. But it was kind of difficult based on the service. So I have like a source to order service where someone asks me for something, I find it, we agree a price, it gets imported, and that was it, which is the only way I could do something. I thought it was quite good. It's quite a personal kind of thing you can discuss, because ultimately you're buying second-hand items at 30 years old. Some of them have the niggles. You have to discuss.
They're going to have a few. Tweak. A little bit of TLC is required.
Yeah, so you have to discuss that with people and make them aware. Look, this is what you're buying. Are you happy with it? And it's that level of customer service that you just can't get if you offer something off a shelf and click add to cart and buy.
Well, you say that, but a state of a lot of the more modern riffs that are sent out from shops, which I've seen, you may as well buy a 30-year-old gun. Some of them, honestly, the build quality of some of the more modern airsoft guns, at the lower end, obviously. You may as well get a 30-year-old gun. I'm not going to lie. But you're sort of aiming at more of a passion project more than a big money making scheme.
Yeah, I mean,
as such.
Essentially, there's as much as I like to import things, and there is things out there. If you had sort of a bottomless wallet to buy it, it's never going to be the kind of giant that, let's say, Patrol Base is, or even some other very well-known dealers, because the aim was never to get
it's not really to compete. You're finding your own niche, really.
Yeah, exactly. And you need buying power for the other niches. You do. These people order quantities into
they'll
several tens of thousands of pounds.
They'll drop 10 grand on a shipment of Cyma.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not feasible for me. One, because it's funded by myself, and two, because the stuff that I want to import, I can't just contact a wholesaler and send an email. It all has to be found by myself, checked out, see if it's in good condition, evaluate the item. That takes time more than anything. And I just don't have time to do that. And it just can't be expanded.
Well, there obviously is a demand. I didn't realise quite how much and how quickly things shift that are of a sort of more older variety as such. When we went to NAF, me and you sort of went and you set up your little stall. I think we mentioned it was it episode 1?
Yeah, I think so.
I was really quite amazed by how all this really unusual rare stuff shifted within the first day. You'd almost cleared shop.
Yes. Yeah, so that didn't take long at all. I brought a few things. There was a nice real sword SVD with real PSO in it, a couple of mags. That was a really nice kit. That now sits on the wall at Kydex Customs.
Yes, I know. I remember one of the lads messaged you into your, wasn't it a social media post that he messaged? If memory serves, I might be wrong. But you soon shifted all the stuff. I was genuinely surprised by how all this old stuff, where you'd think, as a tech anyway, I'd look at it and go, this is proprietary. I'm probably not going to be able to get the parts. It's going to take a lot of work, and it's probably not going to run as good as a stock G&G, for instance. But it's so cool. And people go, rule of cool, I'm buying that. And I can't blame them. It's some of the stuff is really weird. So, rounding off the sort of first part of the episode, what would you have to put in as far as what's your next purchase? What's the next big thing you're looking for? Is it just M4s, or is there much older stuff in as far as AKs are concerned, or?
There's, to be honest, most of the big sort of grail pieces that I wanted for myself, because I used to sort of collect more than I did now. I've had an Asahi MG34, I've had a WA2000. Most of those kind of things that I've had, I'm happy with. The only one that I want, I'll never get, is a Sheriff Highlander Magnum. That's the only thing that's on the list, but obviously we'll go into that in another video because it means nothing to anyone that's watching this probably. But yeah, for me now it's just getting odd bits and niggles. I've got a couple more guns which we'll go over that I'm happy with, so it's just expanding the kit, because for some reason after playing airsoft for almost a decade I seem to have less useful kit now than I did when I started, which is an odd way to come out.
I think most airsofters sort of get their kit and shed kit based off of how useful it is, how often they use it. You do the polar opposite and go, this is really old and weird, I'll keep that.
Yes.
And then the useful stuff, you think, but I want more old and weird stuff.
Yeah, I can get the useful stuff again. If it can be bought new, then it's simple.
Prime example of the other game day we went to at Skirmish, I think we mentioned in episode 2 when we did the site review. You bought a load of these sort of older M4 sort of style platforms, AR platforms, and you'd not tested any of them. You just hoped they all work. Turned up and lo and behold, they sort of worked. Some of them were really overpowered.
HPA tanks freeze, O-rings leak. It was
an experience.
Guns.
So you probably spent the thick end of an hour on the shooting range just finding out what was right and what was wrong.
Yeah, and that sometimes happens, but it's part of the fun. The fact that any of them worked after 30 years was quite impressive. But to service them something else, but we'll go into that.
So on that note, because it's a natural lead on, let's go to part 2. So I'll see you in part 2 in a minute, chaps. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back to part 2 of episode 4 of the Nemcast. So today we are now going over Raresoft's weird stuff. So let's talk about the revolvers very briefly. What have we got in front of us?
So in my hand here we have a Tanaka Super Red Hawk, which is one of Tanaka's many revolvers. Tanaka make countless different numbers of revolvers. Imagine sort of the Western arms, if you like, of revolvers, just different catalogues of models everywhere, so many different ones. This one essentially is chambered in 4.5 Casul, if I've pronounced that correctly. A very powerful round, but it's essentially the same system as the single action army that Courtney's got in his hand. So you've got gas that gets injected into a cylinder inside the revolver, and then on this particular system you rotate the cylinder and drop BBs in there. So it's all self-contained system.
Oh, so you can't take the shells out? It's
not on this one. Now, that's another kind of thing to go on to. Tanaka did make a system for that, but they got banned and destroyed in Japan because they were illegal. So they're a very, very rare coveted item. So this kind of system is called the Pegasus system, which is sort of your gas and cylinder, BBs inside the actual cylinder, or in some cases those you drop them into the little tube underneath. Obviously in this case it's a different design of the revolver, so you don't have that. But yeah, this is an absolute hand cannon sort of thing. That Tanaka make a couple of things like this, like a Smith & Wesson 500, all sorts of different things, all the way down to a little sort of M36 2-inch revolver, really, really different things.
I'm not the most sort of au fait with all the different brands. I'm learning, but every day is a school day for me. I'd never heard of this brand, until really I met you and people started talking about it. How long have they been around for? Is it like one of the OG companies, Tanaka?
Kind of. So Tanaka, some of their older replicas recently did the raffle for the WZ63, which is to this date the first and only airsoft replica, or production replica, of the PM63, which is the Polish machine pistol. That was a gas...
We'll try and throw pictures up in the bottom, by the way, just so you can see what we're talking about.
Yeah, so that was a gas blowback replica made of cast aluminium before the firearms and swords law changed everything. But yeah, they've been making sort of model guns and airsoft guns for around the same length of time. So they've got model versions of things that aren't in airsoft, like, again, Ruger Mini 14. Tanaka make a really nice model gun, but no airsoft one, unfortunately. But yeah, they've been going for a very long time. They still exist. At one point in time, these kind of revolvers were more sold in this country, but it kind of seems to have dropped off quite a lot, which is why you get so many requests for God knows how many different Tanaka revolvers. But they've been around for a long, long time. They know the stuff. They do make, in my opinion, the best airsoft revolvers on the market. The finish on some of these, especially that one, is fantastic. It's far, far better than a Tokyo Marui, a Marushin, King Arms, any of those. It really is a cut above the rest, in my opinion. But yeah, Tanaka have been a thing. They also make I believe the only airsoft version of the trench gun. That's sort of a gas shell design. Yes, it's like PPS shells or Tanaka shells, whatever you want to call them, same thing. Yeah, those weren't really sold here and they're very expensive. So yeah, Tanaka do kind of make some weird and wonderful stuff, mostly historic. They did make a few things. They made a high power way before WE made one 25 odd years later and it was still shit. So Tanaka made one of those a long time ago. So yeah, they've got a good reputation for making items. They used to use like Western Arms systems back then before they developed their own, but now the bread and butter really is the different kind of revolvers on the market. It's what Tanaka is probably best known for now, and the rifles, the M700 and the infamous pre-ban bolt rifles are Tanaka's bread and butter, really.
So, moving on, let's talk about this weird M4AR, Vietnam era.
Yes, so before anyone says, ooh, look at that old gun, it's HPA, you've ruined it. Nope, there was a time before AGs in airsoft, and this was one of them. So before Marine made the gearboxes, most airsoft guns used what's called bullet valve system. Some exceptions, but we'll put a diagram on to basically show you what it is.
Yeah,
so
this is where it gets really fucking weird. If you think there's some weird AAG gearboxes and there's some weird HPA engines, things like that, you wait till you see a bullet valve system.
Yeah.
It's very weird.
So it's weird, but it is quite simple. So it's all mechanical. It's not any of the solenoid stuff like you see in modern HPA engines. It is all just mechanical. And essentially, it's air is fed through this tube, goes right through the bullet valve system here and into the magazine. And that's the first thing that if you were to look at a bullet valve gun, before you look at anything else, you go, oh, that's weird. And essentially, in this particular bullet valve gun, so this is a Sheriff XM177E2. Sheriff were known for making things like very, very high quality pistol kits for Western Arms pistols and other things, upgrades. They patented something called the LRB, which is a long range barrel that puts backspin on the BB without a bucking, which is something we'll get onto. And these mags are air fed. So essentially the air that comes into the gun doesn't just go straight through the engine and propel the BB. It goes through the engine, through the magazine, and out through the magazine, and then through the gun. So for that reason, you don't have to worry about springs, and you'll feed every BB.
If you lose a mag, then you really panic.
Yes.
If you lose a mag in the woods, you go out and you find that mag. It's one of those jobs.
Yeah, especially this little 20-rounder one, because these are only made by one company, so I won't be surprised.
It's one of those things you probably want to get inside of it and put a tracking chip in there. I'm not exaggerating, because I severely doubt you'd find.
I'd never find another one of these short magazines again. Yeah, I've got a couple of the other ones, but yeah, essentially this gun, so this particular one's built on a Marusian PFC receiver, which is a plug fire cap. So model guns, Japanese laws, model guns are allowed to be made from different materials than airsoft guns. So the receivers that Marusian built for these are fantastic. They're far better than even most things on the market today, I would say. Really, really high quality receiver on these. It's got a Jack 3B20 scope on there, which again is another very well-known company that made, well, they're all sort of died a death during the recession in the late 90s in Japan, but they made this nice replica scope that's got on here.
That was sort of the OG height over bore, so Hydra mounts get in the bin. This is the OG. It's very cool.
Yeah, so essentially the way this system works is this one, with it being a Sheriff, it does have an LRB installed. So once air is passed through this magazine and through the BB, it sits on sort of a little feed ramp. Before it gets to the feed ramp, there's an O-ring which basically stops the BB from going any further down the barrel. And the weird thing is, because of that, it's not the PSI that affects the FPS on your gun like you would expect to on most modern engines. It's actually the thickness of the O-ring that's inside that part of the gun, because if you've got a thinner O-ring, it won't let as much pressure build up behind the BB before it goes past the O-ring and leaves the barrel. If you've got a thicker O-ring, then that's what happens. So to tune the FPS, you changed an O-ring, and it's much the same with the rate of fire as well. So if you've got really thick O-rings on the magazine, by the time that air has got to the BB, it'll take more air to push it through and it'll slow down your rate of fire. Whereas again, if you've got, different diameter O-rings, you'll change your rate of fire. Really weird system. But yeah, before that happens, there's what's called an LRB in here. So BB systems, the barrel reciprocates, which does sound really weird, but it's quite cool to watch. So the barrel reciprocates, and if you think, oh, it moves, it's going to go everywhere, and they usually would. So in airsoft guns that aren't as upgraded as this, the barrel just turns left and right, and no one really gave a shit because there was no hop. It was just air throwing. It was a full auto airsoft gun, and before these existed, it was basically just springers and other bits and bobs. So full auto was all the rage. That was the big thing. But this has an LRB, and then what that means, it's a long range barrel. And to apply hop, essentially there's like a little feed ramp on the barrel, and as the BB goes through that O-ring, it gets pushed up that feed ramp, and during that process, when it moves, the air behind it keeps it rotating and riding along.
Gives it backspin.
Exactly.
A bit like a hot nub and rubber.
Yeah,
combo.
but that essentially means that these LRBs were designed for a specific PSI and for a specific weight BB.
And a specific O-ring, and once you've found what you're happy with, you stick with it, or you rebuild the barrel setup as such.
Yeah, which is just impossible nowadays because all these companies are defunct, and making an LRB is a science.
Are they a standard size O-ring?
I can't remember off the top of the head. I can find dimensions for them. But yeah, I mean, the type of O-rings in terms of sizes, if you buy sort of the cheap, gasket repair kits and stuff that people buy on eBay for like a $5 for, you just cheap ones to fill gas magazines. They will go in here, but it's the hardness that affects things as well.
Yeah, the short hardness of the rubber.
Yeah, exactly. So there is a science to it, but yeah, essentially that's what gives this some backspin. So obviously with it being Japanese limits, sort of 2.5s, 2.8s, maybe 3s are typical what most LRBs are tuned for. But again, if you've got that backspin and that barrel's reciprocating, you want to make sure that that barrel isn't putting backspin on to the side. So to do that, you have what's called like an anti-rotation collar, which means you've milled a slot in an outer barrel, you've put a brass collar on it, tapped it with a grub screw, and that grub screw, when that barrel reciprocates, keeps it in a channel, so your barrel is always
aligned. So it stops it
aligned.
from moving left to right.
Exactly, so that's essentially how that system works, which is a really weird bit of kit, but because of the way it works, I have a lot of confidence in saying that the range on this is easily just as good as any AG.
Well, I saw that one you brought to Skirmish the other day. I was genuinely surprised by the range of it. It will outcompete a cheap standard AEG, arguably. Won't quite beat, something that's been really highly tuned. But damn, I was impressed. I was very impressed. For something that's, how old would you say this rifle is?
About 30 years old.
I'm very impressed. It's interesting. It's certainly interesting to say the least. That obviously once you've picked your sort of setup, so your weight BBs, and put the right O-ring in. I keep saying hot rubber, but it's not, is it?
No.
Put the right O-ring in and found that tuned setup, you're away. So if you adjust the PSI, what actually happens then? Is there much difference to the FPS, or is it?
Not really. Essentially, if you adjust the FPS, if you adjust the PSI too high, then you'll have what's called a shotgunning effect, where the pressure behind the BBs is that much that it won't sort of reset. You'll just force all the BBs through at once, and it'll just essentially turn into a big
chaos.
Yeah, it'll just turn into a big shotgun. So that's what happens if you turn the PSI up too much. If you turn it down too little, you'll just hear like a hissing sound because it won't have the pressure needed to push the BBs to where they need to go. Or if it does, they'll get stuck because it won't have enough pressure to move the barrel and fire the BB. So you've got like a small window where the PSI is about right. So typically for most bullet valve guns, the PSI is sat around 70 to 80, sometimes as low as 65, but not really.
So is this a rifle you'd personally want to keep, or how much would something like that set you back roughly at market if you were to buy it from Raresoft, that sort of thing?
The last Sheriff, well, it's not quite the same model as this, but I bought, as far as I'm aware, the last one that came into the country I imported from Greece from a well-known collector. That was for an M16, which is essentially the same technology inside that as this. It's just a different body. Still Mauritian PFC body, just a different shape. That cost, I think with 2 mags or something around that was about £800. So this is easily worth just the same because the XM177 configurations I've not seen before. So that's probably its market value. Obviously you have to be the right person to go and spend that kind of money on the 30-year-old gun. But in fairness, there's not many 30-year-old guns that you can turn around and say, it stood the test of time. I know it's durable enough to take out into a field, and I know it's good enough to actually make me competitive as well. There's not many
once
guns.
you've got your setup tuned, it's quite a competitive platform.
Yeah, there's not many guns that you can say that. So that's why this personally is one that I'm going to be keeping. I've been after something like this for years since I got rid of my last one.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, very nice bit of kit. It's different than a lot of bullet valve guns. Don't look into bullet valve guns and think you'll get the level of performance of a Sheriff, because this is the pinnacle of that kind of technology, the way the valves work, the way the barrel's set up. But it is the pinnacle before AEGs and hot rubbers and that kind of thing started to become the mainstream, because it was cheaper, it was popular, and you don't have to go to the really complex habit of designing an LRB and machining it to suit, because these are made with I think it's 10mm OD brass barrels, because you have to cut it in a certain way, so you can't just use a normal diameter brass barrel, because you won't have enough material to machine the groove that needs to go into it.
Right, so it's quite a proprietary setup as well. We knew that.
Yeah,
anyway.
That's why LRBs are very expensive, and there is a box that I've got that we'll put on the screen that shows what a Sheriff LRB looks like, because they did sell them separately, sometimes for BV guns before hops became a thing. They made LRBs for like Marui AGs as well, so they are a thing, but yeah, essentially the dawn of the AG and bookings and that kind of thing made this kind of technology too expensive, really, compared to just mass
there's a lot of
gearboxes.
Manufacturing involved, a lot of labour,
Yeah.
a lot of fine-tuning.
Yeah.
It'd essentially be like an AEG company, such as Cyma, having to pay someone who's essentially a professional tech to really well shim every gear, correct the AOE of all the pistons, and it'd just be astronomical prices. So I can see why the technology faded away, but it is incredibly cool.
Yeah, that's it. And because there's so many things that are different about this. You can put recoiler weights on there, so essentially just add collars to the barrel, which means that it'll use a lot more air, which means you'll probably need to up your PSI maybe a little bit, but it almost gives like a very light gas blowback kind of feel, because you have got some weight that's reciprocating. So
it's still probably going to be better than a TM recoil. Change my mind.
Yeah, no, I'd take this over a TM recoil, but that's just me.
So I think that rounds up part 2. Let's take a brief pause and we'll be back for part 3 just now. Cheers, chaps. Hey guys, welcome back to the final part, which is part 3 of episode 4, and we're going to be discussing what's going on in the next episode. Now, all being well, assuming we can actually get here because of the snow, because we're recording this on Thursday when we had the amber warning, we'll have Dom. Now, Dom's going to bring his very cool classic army minigun. What's the exact name of it?
It's the M133, I think.
M133. Now, you've probably seen that in a few shorts we put out on YouTube. I'll put them down on the in a little video here for you guys to see. It's a cool bit of kit. We'll do a review and you guys can have a look at that. Now, for the main part of the episode, I've not quite decided what we're going to do yet. Maybe mental health in airsoft, something like that. We'll see. So I think that pretty much rounds it up for today, and we'll speak to you soon, chaps.